For fully 1¼ centuries, the Dickabrim Bridge over the Mary River northwest of Gympie has served Queenslanders well. Dickabrim, an Aboriginal name, refers to the sweet potatoes that once grew on the adjoining Mary River flats. Today's story, The Ballast-Filler, by Marnie Burgess, is based on a tragedy that occurred during the bridge's construction. The story won a competition held in conjunction with the bridge's 125th anniversary celebrations of 2011. I'm Kim Dodsworth, the program, Queensland Storyteller. Vino baited his hook, cast and heard the sinker hit midstream. There were cod under the Dickabrim Bridge, and lungfish. All he had to do was outsmart them. He studied the river in the moonlight and patted Poochie, the old dog, beside him. The breeze rattled leaves and scuds of cloud raced by the moon. The bridge towered, black against the night sky, while streams of stars behind it aroused his memories of its history. Like how, back in the 20s, Ted Rayner once walked up one of the narrow arches in a pair of leather-soled elastic siders, only to find the descent too slippery. At 90 feet above the water, he'd stood alternately on each foot to remove his boots. The bridge certainly had its share of larrikins from the day it was built. He recalled from his boyhood one of his classmates doing the same thing every day on the way to school, and he remembered the racket the trains made crossing the bridge's formidable length. His schoolboy mates would dare each other to man the approaches when the loco came as a test of true courage, and he, along with the other kids, had met the challenge with the same courage that had sustained the settlers. He was proud of the fact that he was the last generation of those settlers to whom adversity was simply a way of life. The flood marks drew another memory. He recalled the 1955 flood, when only the top of the official river level gauge showed above the water at a little under 68 feet. His mates had dared each other to walk across the bridge while the water lapped beneath the deck, and he'd received a belting from his father for doing it. Then there was the 1893 flood, shortly after the bridge's completion, and he'd read about the hundreds of beautiful cedar logs washed down by the high water that for weeks the teamsters worked to clear. Eventually, in the face of the disaster, the logs were burnt. All that cedar, all those trees. It was the biggest flood in the bridge's history, submerging the adjacent farmland, washing away the bridge's approaches, and overflowing the decking by 3 feet. He doubted that even his intrepid schoolmates would have risked that walk. He pulled his coat around him as a car rattled the deck above and watched the sweep of headlights onto the Kilkeven Road. It was still a good bridge for cars, but the locos had ceased. Back a few years, they'd put a 15-ton load limit on the structure to preserve its integrity. Bit of a pity, he thought. Dickabrim was the first rail and road bridge in Queensland. Now there was no rail. In its day, the bridge had linked the coast to the west, and it was still the only place to cross when the Mary came up. Faintly on the wind, he thought he heard a metallic tapping around one of the 4 cast-iron cylinders supporting the bridge spans. A branch on the wind would no doubt be causing it. It sounded again, but this time the wind was still. Poochie growled. Then he heard a low moaning, so he took another swig from the bottle of rum in his pocket. When the moaning continued, Poochie bolted. "Bloody dog," cursed Vino. He studied the cylinder where he reckoned the sounds were coming from, and the silhouetted head and shoulders of a man in the tricky moonlight sent a shot through him. "G'day," he said uncertainly. There was a pause. "G'day," the man replied. "Doing a bit of fishing?" Vino ventured, shrugging into his coat with a sudden onset of cold. Another pause. "Me? Nah. I just like being by the river." "You come down here a bit?" "Yeah, pretty often. I like looking at the bridge. She's a beauty, isn't she?" "Yeah. I helped build it," the stranger said wistfully. This statement put Vino on guard. The bridge had been constructed in 1886. He patted his shirt pocket. "Smoke?" he offered wearily. "Nah, thanks." There was a silence. "Name's Vino." Vino offered his hand. When the stranger didn't reciprocate, he was affronted, suddenly aware of his isolation. He was about to give up when the stranger began talking, more to himself than Vinno. Took him 4 years to build this bridge. Whole town here then, and Gesher's Railway Bridge pub just over there. Used to be a mob of sheep there on Dickerbrum Flats for years. Back in the old days, eh? Vinno thought it prudent to be encouraging. Yeah, the old days. Didn't have a permanent bridge here for a long time, and this one cost him nearly 15,000 quid. But then she's 70 feet high and over 650 feet long. Few people got killed while it was getting built too. Couple of kids drowned, and Tommy Lee got a skinful at Gesher's pub and tried to walk across the half-finished framework. He fell about 50 feet. Then one of the foremen died of heat stroke. That bridge didn't come cheap. I saw the job advertised in the Maryborough Chronicle. He began reciting the advertisement as though he was reading it from a book. Wanted, pick and shovel and hammer and drill men, also ballast fillers and plate layers. Apply on the works to McDermott and Owen Contractors, Dickerbrum near Maryborough. Mr. Reinhold was the day labour supervisor, and he gave me a job as a ballast filler. They imported those big cast iron cylinders you can see there all the way from England. Don't know why. We had foundries here that could have made 'em. They came over by ship in pieces, and we had to bolt 'em together here. Some of the pieces got broke on the way over, so we got held up for weeks while they reordered 'em. Bloody government, pandering to the Poms if you ask me. When the cylinders were finally assembled, they filled them with concrete and seated them right down in the river bedrock. Each pier could take pressure at 90 tons on deck level, and when they drove a 10-ton roller over it, it only moved 1/8 of an inch. In fact, they tested it with 3 locos when it was finished, both stationary and running. All up, they weighed 130 tons, and even the longest span barely deflected half an inch. From where he sat, Vinno could see a couple of house lights across the dark bank. He wondered if it might not be sensible to make his way there and leave the strange man to his own reflections. But he had more to say, and Vinno felt compelled to listen. Bloody government nearly botched the whole project. You know, it took them 5 years of arguing to get the road approaches done. The trains were right, but you couldn't cross the bridge by road because the road on one side stopped a couple of chains before the bridge. There were plenty of teamsters had to pull up, unable to get to Maryborough. And all the government could do was quibble about who was going to pay for the final work. "You a bit of a bridge enthusiast?" asked Vinno carefully. "Me? Nah, I just worked there. It was bloody hard work too, especially in summer." The stranger's voice floated over an unperceived distance. "I needed the money, so when they decided to do shifts filling the cylinders, I managed to get 2 a day." "You fill those cylinders?" "Not on my own. There was a gang of us. We had a platform out from the bank, and when our barrows were full of concrete, we wheeled them out to the cylinder along this narrow plank. It was all pretty wobbly and took hundreds of barrow loads. One day I got the chance of 3 shifts. It meant a lot of money, so I did it. Nearly buggered me. I remember loading up that last barrow and wheeling it out to the plank. I was so tired I could have laid on that plank and gone to sleep. I remember getting out of the cylinder and tipping the barrow up, but somehow it slipped off the plank. I tried to hang on, but I couldn't." Vinno had had enough. "Let me guess, you fell in?" "They couldn't get me out. There was nothing they could do." The stranger stared at the massive cylinder. It was soft and so quiet. Me mates outside, all they could do was keep filling up the cylinder. The rod suddenly bent. Something big had swallowed the bait, and Vinno wound the reel. A fat cod landed at his feet. "Look at that," he announced excitedly. "Now that's a good fish." He looked around for approval, but found himself alone. There was a cold draught around his body, and he laughed hesitantly at his burgeoning imagination. Quickly, he gathered up his gear and headed home. He forgot the cod. And that was The Ballast-Filler by Marnie Walters Burgess. I hope you'll tune in again this time next week when there'll be another short story of quality. I'm Kim Dodsworth, Queensland Storyteller.